Hi, folks. Welcome to today's session. I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with our guest today. Her name's Amrita, and she's a good friend and therapist. And she's here today to talk more about stress, anxiety, especially when it comes to college and career. So please tune right in because you're going to be learning a lot of great tactics to managing stress. All right. Well, without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Amrita. Hi, Amrita. Welcome.
Hi everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, great. So, if you can just introduce yourself really quickly to our audience here and share a little bit more about your journey of getting into your current role as a therapist, as well as what school you went to.
I currently practice as a therapist in one of our local high schools in the Santa Clara County. I did my undergraduate at Fresno State, go Bulldogs, where I pursued a degree in psychology. I come from a family of a lot of medical professions. So after high school, I mustered up the courage to tell my parents that I wanted to pursue a degree in psychology. That's our career in psychology. I always knew ever since I was a young child that I wanted to help other people. And although medical school would have allowed me to do that, I wanted to do it in a different context. I ended up getting a master's in counseling with an emphasis in marriage, family, and child therapy as a licensed therapist.
I love that journey. And Rita, kudos to you for mustering up the courage to tell your parents when you were already on that track that they were really just hoping for you to complete as well. There are some professionals who are career transitioners, and imagine if you didn't really listen to your heart, where that lead you to today. You wouldn't be impacting the students, or at least the current students that you have at your school in such a
Absolutely.
fashion if you didn't follow your heart.
Yep. And I'm very grateful that I had the courage. I will say it wasn't easy, but it happened. And, today, after practicing as a clinician for 7 years, my family is very proud of me. And
Yeah.
I'm hopeful that that's what, our coming generations will experience too.
Totally. Well, thank you so much for giving more color to your background. We would love to jump into the first question here, which is, can you share a little bit more about the signs of stress and anxiety, especially when it comes to college and career? Because oftentimes when we start recognizing it, at least for me, it's too late. I'm already just in the slums. I'm stressed. I'm tired. So would love to hear from your side.
Yes, absolutely. So anxiety and stress is literally what I deal with. It's what I support students with. It can look very different in every individual. What
Mhm.
I see in a high school setting, some examples is decrease in academic performance.
Mhm.
Another thing is decrease in motivation. And how I usually gauge that is if students are not turning in their assignments on time, or not doing assignments at all. And then the third factor that I kind of look at is school avoidance altogether, right? Or truancy is the school term. I like to use school avoidance, and that is where students may not be, they may purposely not be going to particular classes. So those are signs that I look at that pertain to academics. And
Mhm.
so and I think that all kind of goes hand in hand with college and career. One of the biggest signs of stress and anxiety that I see is procrastination. As humans, we are amazing at
Mhm.
procrastinating because if something is overwhelming or if you're having that increased level of stress,
Yeah.
what what better thing to do than just to avoid it and hope that it'll go away and be dealt
Yeah.
with when it needs to. But what procrastination ultimately does is it adds to your, levels of stress. There's multiple factors that can play into procrastination when it comes to college and career, family pressure.
Mhm.
Similar to my journey of, okay, well, I need you to apply to this college because it has an amazing pre-med program. But in your heart of hearts, you kind of know, that's not really my realm and I don't
Yeah.
really want to do it. Or low confidence or self doubt. What's even the point in applying to these colleges if I know I'm not going to get in?
Yeah.
Right. And so I think those are really important to tackle head on early on, which is very much easier said than done.
Yeah.
um, to prevent you from, suffering with symptoms of anxiety or increased levels of stress later on.
Mhm. Absolutely. Okay, since you already mentioned procrastination, I was totally going to bring that up because college applications, I see students procrastinate all the time. And even the best of the best procrastinate. Do you have any advice on how to overcome some of that anxiety to starting your applications and ultimately not miss the deadline?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I tell my students is I want you to envision yourself when you are procrastinating and you get to the end. Are you going to feel more stress, or are you going to be like, okay, let me just do this application and not put as much effort and call it a day?
Mhm.
More often than not, students are going to say, it's just going to stress me out more, even though it is easier to procrastinate now,
Yeah.
right? So, what I encourage students to think about is taking baby steps versus having to do huge tasks in order to accomplish the goal of meeting a deadline, right?
Mhm.
So, an example of baby steps may be make a to do list. Just look up an application, just take a look at it. Or you're not starting, but that's a baby step, right? You're at
Yeah.
least doing something pertaining to it versus a big task may be, uh-oh, I only have 2 weeks before this deadline. So now I have to write my personal statement and I have to do the application. And so these big tasks will then give you higher levels of anxiety, which will give you a higher likelihood of not doing the application at all. Open up a Word document and like just I like to say thought vomit, like just blah, I guess in the college world or the career world, it's called brainstorming. But like just typing like maybe your journey or the beginning of answering a personal statement question can go a long way because you can say you did something, right?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Something that helps is binge watching some YouTube videos about college
Mhm.
too. So, the folks that are tuning in right now, you're taking those baby steps right now.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Very
you're doing something pertaining to an application. You couldn't have said it better, Tiff. Yeah, as humans, we get a lot of peace of mind when we hear other people's stories because it's relatable,
Yeah.
right? And so, if you're feeling like feelings of overwhelm, or if you feel like your stress levels are increasing, YouTube a YouTuber or somebody who probably is experiencing the same thing as you are, and then you can
Mhm.
have this moment of like, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one. This is normal. Now we're going to move forward and try to succeed.
I was just going to ask you for some tips on how to normalize mental health, right? I've noticed with a lot of students that I work with, they're going through a lot, and it's, social life, academics, parental pressures, and sure, recognizing it is one, but accepting it and normalizing it and taking the steps to do better is an area of growth I see for a lot of students. So do you have any advice there?
Absolutely. So this is a huge part of my job. Honestly, this is the reason why I am a therapist. Like I said, as a person of color, I come from a background of there being a huge stigma on mental health, right? In a nutshell, what are some ways to normalize? It's important for us to understand what's normal for students, which is let me go see my guidance counselor to talk about my math class. And then I could talk about my symptoms of anxiety. And then the counselor can say, you know what? Do you want to see one of our therapists? And then students may say, oh gosh, I don't want my parents to know.
Yeah.
And then, it turns into this whole web and network of like, oh my gosh, maybe it's not so bad seeing a therapist, right? And they can talk really quickly or at least get some information and hopefully get the mental health support at that point.
Yeah, I love that point. Use your resources. Do you have any other resources
Yeah.
beyond a physical person? Because sometimes that gets daunting.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a lot of hotlines that you can reach out to. I can definitely give you those resources and you can post them later.
Okay,
Um,
great.
when people think of hotlines, they automatically think of crisis hotlines, right? They think of like, okay, if I'm in danger of harming myself or harming others, then that's when I reach out to these people. I think those are very important. So I'll give you those two. There's also online platforms such as BetterHelp. There's Talkspace, where you can actually, link up with a therapist,
Mhm.
and that you could text with them. If you wanted to be assigned a therapist, I think it is a small fee, but you actually meet with a therapist virtually. If you're over the age of 12, you don't need parent consent. But there is that payment piece, which I
Yeah.
know they're willing to work with you on. And then there's Headspace, there's Calm, even YouTube videos about
Yes.
guided meditations.
Mhm.
I oftentimes do that in my office. Or you know what? Music. Lyrics can really hit home sometimes.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Amrita. I think it's
Absolutely.
really important to have access and knowledge around these resources because especially when it comes to that big transition from high school to college, oftentimes you're reflecting on what are my goals in life, like very big questions, and it can get really deep. So, in order to understand yourself better, you need to have a little bit more clarity and it's okay to have aid. I've seen a few students have blimps throughout their high school records, either it be because of COVID, there's impacts that for on their mental health, or they just made mistakes that they really regret. So, what is your recommendation when it comes to applying to college? Should students mention this in their application? What would you recommend?
That's a great question. A very complex question too, right? But
Mhm.
the first thing that I want to start off by saying is we're all human. We all make mistakes. And sometimes mistakes are repairable, and sometimes they may not be so repairable in the
Mhm.
context of what you're looking at, right? And so I truly believe, professionally, it's important to acknowledge that you have made a mistake, but that mistake does not define who you are and your capabilities, but it is something that you experienced,
Yeah.
right? And so anytime I actually, a lot of the students that are sent to me are usually students who have made a mistake, whether it be academically, socially, or personally,
Mhm.
and it may impact their college. First step is to acknowledge, and the second step is to let everybody else know that you acknowledge and then that you're willing to learn from it. Right?
Mhm.
Communicating with people, your school counselors, letting your teacher know, you know what, I messed up. What can I do to repair this, or what can I do to show that this is not who I am? That
Mhm.
goes a long way, right? And when it comes to should I write this in my application, I always ask, is it part of your journey? Well, why not? Help me understand why you don't want to write about it.
Mhm.
So it is a little bit of a gray area, but it's gauging. Does it pertain to what you are writing? Does it pertain to the big picture of what you want this college to depict you as, or not? If
Mhm.
not, then no need.
Yeah. I think you put it perfectly. So, we touched upon how COVID has impacted students' mental health, and I've seen many students write about COVID-19 in their applications. I know it's not as original. So, what is your suggestion when it comes to this?
So I don't think that there is an issue about necessarily writing about your mental health or your mental health challenges that you experienced in your high school career. But I think the question is that the only thing you're going to write about in your application,
Mm.
right? Once again, your experiences shape who you are, and it's important to write about your journey and what sets you apart in this statement, right? And so it goes back to what I was saying and also what you were saying, which is what is your end goal of what you want this application to look like. So yeah, you may sprinkle in a little bit of mental health in there, but if you're only talking about challenges of living in a pandemic, I mean, that was everybody. I suggest students to do is think about the panel who's going to be reading your application. And so, how often in your application are they going to be like, well, me too? Yep, me too. Ooh, and that student too, and that person too. What's going to set you apart?
Yeah.
Right?
As Amrita's mentioned, if it's something that's pretty generic, but it still impacted your grades or whatever the case is, but you don't necessarily have enough content and context to write an essay, there's that supplemental sections that most applications have where you can give a little bit more color there if you'd like.
Right. And I think just going back to this question, something that came to mind
Mhm,
is mental health is not only stress and anxiety, right? It could be
mhm,
some symptoms of depression. It could also be a lot of times, you know, what I hear is isolation. When our students, especially here in the Bay Area, who are in our public school system, know how to do school in person. And then
mhm.
they were forced to do virtual learning for a very long period of time. And then they're expected to come back to school like everything was normal this past year, right? Now, talking about your experiences of maybe being at home, feeling isolated, not having any of that social support of your parents while they're working, or maybe your friends and not being able to see them. Now,
Mhm.
elaborating on how that affected you, that may set you apart.
You touched upon this confidentiality piece a little bit earlier around parents and students overall. How do you usually navigate that? And how would you recommend to students who are hesitant to tell their parents about their challenges as well?
Yeah, so yes, confidentiality is a huge thing. I try to build rapport with the student and try to understand their perspective of why they don't want their parents to know. It's all about communication. I think it's very important to ask questions and say, well, what are my parents going to know? Is there any way
Mm,
that you can talk to my parents? And in order to get students to do that, I think as clinicians, as therapists, we have a huge task in these schools, and that is to build that trust in that relationship. Maybe with the exception of one or two students, I've gotten buy-in to talk to parents, and oftentimes I have students right there with me, whether it be a phone call or I invite parents to come and see me in my office with the student there. And I will give them my spiel, and I usually talk to students about what they want me to tell their parents. And then I provide a space for the student to be able to communicate with their parents too.
that's
And so
great.
that's been a huge thing, and I think that's ultimately it's resulted in the student getting the support that they need and parents being so appreciative most of the time. And so
Good.
I continue to do that, and I think that's very important.
I love that, Amrita, and especially the advice that you give in students that you should ask questions to your school guidance counselor, therapist, whoever it is that you're working
Absolutely.
with, and confiding in detailed questions to make sure that you're all both on the same page, having that open communication to ensure that whatever's shared with your parents is approved by you.
This is all easy for me to say, but it's
Mhm.
not easy to do. It goes back to what we started in started to say in our conversation, which is it takes a lot of courage to speak up and say, you know what, something's not right.
Mhm.
I used to be really good at, just staying on top of my work. I didn't think it would be this hard to start my college applications. What's coming up for me? Why am I feeling so resistant or wanting to avoid this? And that's what I'm hoping ultimately the mental health support will allow, students to be able to reflect on and understand so they can overcome it and continue to be successful with whatever that means for that
Mm.
student. So,
That's such a good point, Rita. I still struggle with it till this day. I have a whiteboard
absolutely.
with tons of to-do lists, and there's times where an event that I need to, an activity that I need to do moves from Monday to Tuesday to Wednesday, and I have to remind myself I need to pause and reflect. Why am I taking so much time to do this task when I know it's not going to take that much effort? So, thank you for reminding me
Exactly.
about that.
Sometimes I still look at my to-do list and I'm like, "Oh gosh, I didn't do enough today." Right? So, newsflash to all you students, even, adulting, when you adult, it doesn't mean that you succeed. This is like a never ending
Yeah.
trial and tribulation type of thing. And that's okay. That's what life is about, right? So,
Absolutely. And a lot of the practices that I'm embedding now as I look back at the week, once it hits Sunday and I start prepping my plans for the next week,
uh-huh.
is what did I learn? And then what did I really enjoy? Like celebrate. Because you've done a lot, even though you might not reach all your goals in that session, but you should really take some time to celebrate all the effort that you put in as well.
100%. There's your reflecting right there. One last thing that I do want to add, because I do know
Yeah.
we talked a lot about our parents and, parent pressure and stuff like that. The one thing that I always try to remind our students, and I remind myself every day,
Mhm.
is parents have this expectation of me to pursue this or that, but have they really heard my perspective? Am I understanding theirs, or am I staying narrow minded and saying, you know what, they just want me to do this thing and they don't even see me? Right?
Yeah.
So, communication both ways, where parents feel that they're heard and students also feel that they're heard, are so important. And that's the reason why we do what we do.
Yeah.
Right. So, I just want to end with that because as you get older, you realize, okay, maybe it wasn't that bad after all. So,
That's a really good point, having that two-way communication with your parents, because once again, you and I from Asian households and
absolutely.
likely first generation in America, our parents came here with so much pressure for themselves, and oftentimes it reflects onto us. So just sitting down with them and having that two-way street instead of just being completely quiet and submissive, which is what I did most of my childhood up
Mhm.
until I realized, hey, I don't like the way this is going, or whatever the
Exactly.
case is. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you, Amrita.
Thank
You
you for
are
having me.
absolutely amazing. All the students and the school that you're working with are so lucky to have you. Folks, please comment down below if you have any thoughts, any questions about mental health for me or Amrita, especially, and we'll try to answer them as well. And don't forget to subscribe, because we'll be sharing all things college and career here as well. So we'll go ahead and see you next time.